I'm starting with this cheap cabinet. It's about one step above the Dollar Tree furniture. The orange wood tone is not doing us any favors, so I'm stripping it with some oven cleaner. You may have seen this hack on the internet where you use oven cleaner as a wood stripper. Normally, people use Easy Off, but the generic stuff works just as well as the brand name stuff and it's cheaper. I'm wearing gloves since it's corrosive. I completely coated the cabinet, but all the foam goes away. 30 minutes later, I'm rinsing off the oven cleaner. You can do this in the sink or with your hose, but I'm just using a water bottle. The finish looks exactly the same, but as I'm rinsing it, you can see the stain coming off of it. I agitated the cabinet for about a minute or two using a wire brush, wetting as needed before repeating the process. Here's how it looked when it dried before I added the second coat. I'm not sure if you need to let it dry between coats, but I was worried the wet surface would dilute the oven cleaner. If you'd like to know more about my outfit, I was wearing black sweatpants covered in cat fur, striped socks, and slippers. People have been using this method on full-size furniture and decor for years, and they usually don't get this terrible result. The inside of the cabinet was nicely stripped, but on the outside there's this extremely cheap varnish that seems kind of like super glue that was repelling the oven cleaner. Normally, the main benefit of using the oven cleaner is you don't have to use stripper or sand, but I had to sand off this cheap varnish before the third and final coat. I resorted to desperate methods like scraping it off with a blade, and I eventually took it outside and used an orbital sander on it a bit too aggressively. I rinsed and scrubbed after the final coat, and it still looked pretty dark while it was wet, but it dried much lighter. You may have noticed I managed to lose a piece and break the door while I was sanding, so that's a future me problem. For now, I'm addressing the wood tone, which is pretty gray, so I'm covering the entire thing with normal household bleach. Bleach will not only brighten your whites, it'll also whiten your wood. I used just about a capful of bleach to cover the entire cabinet inside and out, and then put it in the sun to dry. You can see how the top of the cabinet has this dark area, and it was like that all over the piece, but it's completely white and even once it's bleached. This looks so much better than the orange wood we started with, but I did need to take some fine files to get some of the stain out of these tight areas. Since I lost a piece, I decided to remove all of the cross pieces from each of the doors. You may have noticed from the thumbnail photo, I didn't end up sticking with this idea, but this sort of thing happens when I'm making miniatures. I always have a vague idea of what I want to do, but the plan evolves as I'm crafting and issues come up or new ideas spring to mind. I really like the new blonde tone of wood, but to tone it down even more, I'm adding a very thin wash of brown, white, and water. Applying a wash like this is a trick furniture flippers use to neutralize any remaining red or orange wood tones. I'm coating the entire cabinet and letting the mixture soak in for a minute or two. I kept my mixture pretty watery because I want to retain the natural wood grain, but you can go more opaque with this mixture as well. I really want the wood grain to show through, so I'm wetting a paper towel and wiping off the paint mixture. I've added so much moisture the shelves have come loose, so I'm just removing them. With the shelves out of the way, I sanded the inside of the cabinet. I sanded the shelves and applied the paint wash. I had been planning to paint the inside of the cabinet, but I've decided to use some pretty printed paper instead. Bentley House Minis has a great technique where she uses post-it notes to create a template, but I don't have any post-it notes, so I'm just using pieces of computer paper. I cut off and marked the 4 corners to make sure my template has perfect 90-degree corners. I taped the pieces together and made an arrow so I know which end is up. I'm using this paper I got from Temu, which you may recognize from my decoupage floor tutorial. Many of the patterns are small scale, so they work in miniature, and it comes with several sheets of each kind. This blue pattern caught my eye because I like the neutral flowers, but I think the pattern is a bit too big. This one seemed too busy and not as feminine as I would like. I chose this pink pattern, but as I was putting away the paper, the rose pattern caught my eye. I traced my template onto the back of the paper, making sure the roses are oriented upward. I used the same template to figure out the height of the side pieces. I cut the pieces a little bit short so you can't see the paper in between the door and the side of the cabinet. I'm attaching the side pieces using double-sided tape and a glue stick. If I was doing this again, I would have made the side pieces of paper a bit longer and folded them behind the back piece so there's no wood visible in the corners. I used double-sided flooring tape and some more of the skinny tape to add the back piece. The flooring tape is very sticky, so I'm really carefully adding this paper. Had I placed this in the wrong spot, there is no way to remove it without destroying it. The two shelves seemed a bit busy to me, so I decided to eliminate one of them and only add one shelf so I can display larger items on the top. The shelves were originally positioned to be in line with the doors, but since I removed those cross pieces, I can put them wherever I want. This way it'll look less busy and I won't need as many minis to fill the space. Before permanently attaching the shelf, I'm sealing the paper with some Ultra Matte. I added 2 layers of the sealer to protect the paper. Not only will this help the paper resist stains, but you could stick a tacky wax to the surface and clean it off. I added glue around 3 sides of the shelf and I'm putting it in at an angle. It's impossible to avoid getting glue on the surface when you do this, but my sealer was still wet, so I just went over top the wet glue with more sealer. I'm using Legos I got at the Goodwill bins to make sure my bottom shelf is square. I'm using the Legos because of the perfectly square corners and not necessarily because of the height. It was just a coincidence these were the exact same height that I placed my shelf. To reinforce the shelf, I'm running a bead of glue under it. You could add a brace for the shelf to sit on by adding matchsticks or thin strips of wood, but I wanted my shelf to have no visible means of support. At this point, I was still planning to replace the door, but Desert DIY, who's a furniture flipper, mentioned how these cabinets sell best when she removes the doors, so I decided to do that as well. Now I can display minis without the doors hiding them. I'll use these doors in a different project someday, although I wish I hadn't completely dismantled them before deciding that. I'm using paste finishing wax to seal the piece. I bought this in 2017 and recently rediscovered it in my garage, so don't feel like you have to run out and buy this product. I just want to use it up. You can use any sealer you have, but I do think a matte finish would be nicer than a satin or a high gloss. Adding sealer not only protects the wood, but it'll also highlight the grain. According to the instructions for my wax, you coat the piece, wait 15 minutes, and then buff it with a soft cloth. This removes the wax that didn't penetrate the wood. I want this piece to look like an antique, so I'm using a Chippendale key plate I got from Earth and Tree Miniatures. It comes with tiny nails to attach it, but I don't think I'll ever try to bang in tiny nails again, so I'm just gluing some nail art to the surface to look like nail heads. The natural brass color looks super cheap to me, so I'll be covering these with rub and buff, but first I'm coating them with Ultra Matte so the rub and buff will stick more easily. I'm painting more nail heads than I'll need because I often drop and lose these. The Ultra Matte dries very quickly, so now I'm coating them with antique gold rub and buff. I always suggest you use what you have, but I haven't found any products that apply as easily as rub and buff and give such a beautiful luster. The subdued gold color of the rub and buff looks so much more realistic and expensive than the cheap shiny brass. I was planning to use these as handles, but then it occurred to me that this is a lock that goes in the center of the drawer. So I went through my stash of hardware to find 2 matching handles that would work. I love the look of these dangly drawer pulls I also got from Earth and Tree, but I think they may be a little too big for my drawer. I settled on these floral handles. I think the horizontal orientation of these handles matches the long drawer, and the floral theme matches my background paper. I coated the floral handles as well as the dangly ones with rub and buff. This does look a lot better, but I'm still going with the floral. Seeing wood through a keyhole doesn't look very realistic, so you can color it with a marker. Instead of just creating the illusion of a hole, I'm actually drilling mine out with a pin vise. I'm going around the outer edge of the hole I drilled with a marker just in case any of this is visible through the keyhole. I attached all of the hardware with this Beacon 3-in-1 glue, which is very similar to Fabri-Tac. I put it in a needle tip bottle I got from Temu. Consider joining my Patreon as a free member or as a paying member for $3 a month, and please check out this next video that I worked really hard on.